Okay, so I don't care what kind of gardener you are, propagation is like the core of really growing things. How do you, and why propagate, okay? As Sarah said earlier, once you become a master gardener, you will never buy a plant again, right? Because we're propagating all the time, and we have too much, so we can keep it away. You have a continuous supply of plants, so that you keep on propagating them, like succession gardening. Have you talked about that at all? With vegetable gardening, so that you kind of put plants in the garden at different intervals, so you have a constant supply. You can replace short-lived perennials. So some perennials, lavender, things like that, they only last really for maybe 5-6 years, and they get kind of stringy, and then you want to replace them so they still have the fragrance. This is the cool one for me. You prevent plant extinction. There's so many species that are starting to just die out. You hear about animals dying out, but plants are dying out as well. What's very cool, there's a place called the Doomsday Vault. It's in Norway, and they're saving seeds in the ideal conditions and freezing, so that if there's a big nuclear explosion or something happens, and certain species are wiped out, that we will have seeds there so that we can kind of repopulate our plants. Propagation, creating new hybrids and cultivars. So, have you talked about genetic modified organisms? Okay, it's a big discussion. I don't want to go into it because there's a lot of emotion about that. But basically, when you propagate, you can kind of change your plants to kind of suit what you want, and that's what's happened over the decades, the millennium, with tomatoes. Where did tomatoes come from originally? Mexico, all right? But if you see a native Mexican tomato, it just looks like this little thing on a vine somewhere. Now we have these big ones that we can put one slice on a sandwich. That didn't come naturally, all right? That was from crossbreeding, hybridization, and it got to a point where they were heirlooms so that they come true. You can correct legginess, and we're going to see how that works here with these plants today. You can maintain the health of existing plants by getting rid of disease plants and starting and clone desirable specimens. So you have to be careful because dahlias, there's certain dahlias that are protected because they are copyrighted, just like a book is copyrighted, so you don't want to plagiarize. So plants can be plagiarized and you can get in trouble. Roses, there are a lot of roses that are copyrighted. Well, I don't even know if that's the right word. But trademark could be it, yeah. Okay, let's see here. All right, let's see what's going on. Aha. So these are the different types of plant propagation. So you have sexual, I'm going to show you a slide quick. That's basically your seed population. Now what I'm going to talk about is all broad and general. There's always an exception to the rule, but let's just go general. Then there's vegetative. Most of propagation that we will talk about today is vegetative, because you know about seed starting. Okay, we're going to talk about that as well, but these are the different ways that if you really get into it, now I don't have any kids, so this is like creating babies for me, so you take care of them like you do your children. All right, so we're going to go over stem cutting, leaf cutting, there's dividing, layering, there's simple layering and air layering. Then you have trees that you want to propagate, root cutting, bulb, chipping. I have a little video on that, and grafting. So we're going to go through all that. Hopefully I can go through this in 45 minutes or an hour or less, and then we're going to go outside, put some pots, soil in some pots, take some things off the shelf here, and you can go home with a couple plants, and hopefully they'll live. Okay. All right. Let's see what we got here. Okay, I love this slide. This is the sexual thing. I know you had a biology, didn't you have, that one of the first things talked about this and how plants. This is, these are how most flowers are created, okay, over the years. And why? Can you figure out why most flowers are like this? The word pollinator, they get the pollen and then they can create. So that's how things have developed over time. So here's the seed. So this is, all of this ends up with this, and then it starts all over again. This will, you'll have this all in the slide presentation, so we don't have to go over a lot of stuff. Okay. But if you ever want to teach your kids or explain seeds to people, this is a great slide. All right. So we're going to talk about annuals. That's the other thing. Did you go over annuals and perennials? She said briefly. So I want to try to integrate some of the propagation information with knowing about annuals and perennials. Okay. So there's a lot of good stuff about annuals. Okay. They're easy to grow. You can start them from seed if you know how to do. There's always new improved varieties, and you can have something new every year because they only last a year and then they die out. Right. They can self-seed. What happens when they self-seed though? They kind of go back to their basic, like if you have a tomato that self-seeds, what happens? Does it always come back as the tomato you expect? It comes back as a cherry tomato, right? Like the original Mexican tomato, right? Okay. And the other thing about annuals, because you can change them every year. If your garden, I don't know what kind of gardens you have, but if you have landscaping, the rule is basically 80% perennials, 20% annuals. So you can change your annuals every year and give your garden a fresh look, where your perennials are kind of like the background. They're a little bit harder to take care of than perennials because they probably need watering more often. They probably need cutting back. And if you have to plant something every year, it's just more expensive because you're constantly buying these. And because you have to sow the seed and set them out as plants every year. All right. This is the other thing, just a segue from Sarah's presentation. Annuals are most likely to be herbaceous because they don't have time to create twigs and hard stems. So they're most likely to attract the pests. All right. So here's the cabbage worm she was talking about. Here's the tomato hornworm she was talking about. Squash vine worm. Okay. They kind of went to the same school, I guess. And then of course bambi. Right. So sweet. But eating, I don't know what he's eating, but a chunk of something, but he's like looking at going like, yeah, take it out of mine. All right. So annuals are most likely to be herbaceous, so you'll have more pest problems with annuals. I'm just sticking this in here because if you live in Baltimore City, you need to be aware that we have microclimates even in the city and in the state. So if you notice, usually you'll say, oh, Maryland is zone 7. Did they talk about zones yet? I don't want to be redundant. But if you notice, 7A to 7B is all there on the eastern side and the southwest part. If you move out to Garrett County, you're in zone 5B, which means -10 to -15 degrees. Okay. So I think it's pretty interesting. So you can see why Maryland is a great place to grow stuff because we have such a broad opportunity and our climates are so broad. But look at this. I thought this was pretty fabulous. This is Baltimore City. This is the harbor. This is a study done between 3 cities, and it was Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. And it was the urban climate study. If you can see the differences in the different places, we have microclimates all over the place. Every place you see where it's dark red, concrete, asphalt, building, asphalt, building. Every place where it starts to get a little lighter, parks, gardens, greenways, and of course when you get out. So when you are doing your annuals, when you're propagating, you have to kind of know where you are because you might have a microclimate. You might have Florida in your backyard. So it's that's why I put this up here. So you really have to be able to focus on what you're going to grow and if it's appropriate for your location. Okay, so we're going to talk about seeds. This is the information you really need to study. These are 3 seed packets. They all tell you basically the same thing. and they're all specific to the seeds in that packet. Seeds are individualized just like human beings. We all have different needs. But read the seed packet. I said a couple. Read the seed packet. What you need to know when it says a plant is going to be ready to flower, whatever, that's from when it's transplanted into the ground. If it says 6 weeks to flower, it doesn't mean 6 weeks from when you put the seed in the ground. It means 6 weeks from when you put the transplant into the ground. So you have to really pay attention to how long it takes that seed to germinate and stick up the dicot leaves and then the true leaves that come out. So the dicot leaves are the ones that are they all look alike. They're like these little shapes, and then the true leaf will come out. And then when that looks like it's ready, that's when you transplant it into the ground. But this, I think this one is, this will show you pictures. That's nice. Here, this will give you the zones. And this looks like a little, whoops. This like Berkeley does a lot of that, look like that. Okay. Johnny's seed is really good. They'll have you, if you buy Johnny's seed, anybody know about Johnny's? They're one of the best places you can, they have probably Johnny's seed, if you want to buy online, buy from Johnny's. They probably have close to a 95% germination rate the first year, at least 80%. What you need to know about seeds too is that Johnny doesn't grow their own seeds all the time. Burpee doesn't grow their own seeds. All, you know, the different, they all buy from massive seed growers in the Midwest, Canada. So a lot of these seed places get their seeds from the same source. So even they say, right, they're all, during COVID, it was a real problem because they were all fighting this. The supply chains were bad, so seeds actually were difficult to get and the price went up. But they all come from about 3 or 5 of the same seed grower, which is interesting to me. Okay, all right. Plant, when you plant, general wisdom, usually you plant the seed about 2 times its depth, okay? Now, we're gonna go over, you'll see all this stuff. If you plant a seed too deep, it's not going to germinate properly and it'll come up weak. If you plant it too shallow, same thing, okay? Some seeds need light to germinate, mostly the small ones and mainly flowers. I think there are some that are vegetables, I think lettuce, dill, parsley, they need light to generate. I think I have them up there. And those, I don't have the, I wish I brought the bag, I forgot, I'm sorry. You know what vermiculite is? Okay, if you're going to plant your seeds in a box or whatever, vermiculite is a nice thing to put on top of those seeds that need light because it holds the water and allows the light to come through. So it's just a gentle little sprinkling of vermiculite. So always keep that on hand if you're going to plant seeds. All right. If it doesn't work, if you planted it too deep, just try it again at a different depth. Okay. And then some seeds need light to germinate. This is just some guidelines how to prevent germination failure. Vermiculite, I swear by it. I worked with a woman last year. She's kind of like a truck farmer in Delaware, and she does all of her own seed starting, and she swears by it. What she'll do is she'll has these flats, and they're cedar flats, they're wood, and they may be about 12 inches, 18 inches by 10 inches. Puts potting soil, very good quality potting soil, or Pro Mix in the bottom, which, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then she'll just sprinkle the seeds on top, pat them in nice and gently, put the vermiculite on top, and just make sure they're lightly watered and never dry out. And she has almost like a 90% germination rate. It's amazing. Keeping seed moist but not wet is really important. If you're going to sow your seeds outside, you got to be a little more careful because you need to make sure that the ground is not too hard. Because if it's too hard on the top of the seed, the water's going to run right off. It's not going to get the moisture. Mulch, you don't want to plant in heavy mulch. Mulch, usually, you can do light mulch over top, but usually those are larger seeds. Squash, beans, they can survive that, but not, you want to keep it well watered. Let me see anything I After the first pair of true leaves, thin them to recommended spacing, and then you can transplant whatever you thin. So sometimes if you plant carrots, root vegetables are a little tough, but you have to get them early, but you can transplant root vegetables. But carrots have little tiny seeds, and you put them in the row, and then they start to come up, and then you just kind of go through, and you can take those and stick them in another row if you can. Okay? Read your seed packet, okay? Most of the time, you want to start your seeds early. You know, there's always a competition. Who's got their tomatoes first right, on their block? At least that used to be the way it is. So start 5 to 6 weeks before the first frost. Do you know when the first frost is in Maryland? That's what it says up there, right? It can be as early, the last frost, thank you. The last frost, it can be as early as April 15th because of climate change, okay? So, if you're looking at your seed packet and you see the germination, you just subtract those days back and then plant it 6 weeks before what you think might be at last frost, okay? The other thing about seeds, when you put them in the ground and transplant, you see all this ground and it's all empty, and then you put this little tiny plant in there and you go, oh, it looks so lonely. And then you'll put one right next to it because it'll keep it company. And then all of a sudden you realize you have a plant that's this big around. Your cabbages are like stuck together. Right. So always think about what the plant is supposed to look like when it's mature. Okay? And then plant for that size. Because you've seen trees, and then you see people where they put their trees together, right? And all of a sudden they're all crepe myrtles, good example. Sometimes it's pretty though when they have like the red and the purple all pushed together, but it keeps them from getting their mature, full potential if you have them too close together. And especially if you have things like cauliflower. Let me see, for your vegetables, cauliflower, broccoli, squash, of course, because that takes up a lot of room. What other things? Peppers can get pretty big too, right? So you can give them a lot of room. Peppers always need staking though. Some other things that are big. Tomatoes, yeah. How far apart do you plant your tomatoes? Depends, right? Because sometimes we're not going to talk about vegetable gardens, it's a whole different subject, but if you're going to strip the stems, you can get them closer. But if you're going to let them go crazy, you want them far apart. Okay. When you're doing seeds, or when you're planting seeds, you do not want to use a medium that has any kind of fertilizer or nutrients in it. You want to use something that is sterile. It can have the mycorrhizin in it. ProMix has that in there. You really don't want to start feeding your plant until it has roots because it can't absorb nutrients until it has roots. So once you transplant your seeds, that's when you start to fertilize it. Heavy feeders, keep on fertilizing it. That's the other vegetable garden talk. I'm not going to go there. But you have to, if it looks like it's not thriving, it's probably because it doesn't have enough nutrition. All right. You can read through all of this. All right, I'm just giving you a list of some seeds and what they need. So, seeds that need light to germinate, ornamental peppers, coleus, alyssum, ageratum, and cleome, which are flowers, all right? Light soil, or these are seeds with needs, I call them, okay? Light soil or not soil with so broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, just light soil, and then a lot of moisture. All right, hard-coated seeds that benefit from soaking. Because if they're already wet when they go in the ground, they don't have to wait as long to get their moisture from the soil. So it kind of speeds up the germination rate. And then, does anybody know what scarification is? That's when you kind of like rub the seeds on sandpaper or something rough, just to kind of like break open that hard shell so that they can receive the moisture a lot faster. So that's scarification. When you think, you scrape yourself, that leaves a scar. So think about it that way. Okay. These are fussy seeds. Some seeds don't grow in the warm. They want hot, they want cool. Arugula is one. Brussels sprouts. It's very hard to grow Brussels sprouts in Baltimore City. I don't know if you've been successful, but most of the Brussels sprouts you get are coming from like probably a 5, zone 5. But all of these in the beginning, plant by St. Patrick's Day. Okay. Especially peas. You say always have the peas in the ground by St. Patrick's Day. All right. The ones down here are the seeds that don't transplant well. And the reason they don't transplant well is because they send out deeper roots, and when you try to transplant them, those roots get injured. So one of the tips you want to do is just maybe trim off the roots if you really want to transplant those things. But don't transplant them when they're really established. You want to do it when they're young, okay? Those are fussy seeds. Lavender doesn't transplant well. Let me see. Some other perennials don't transplant well, but we're going to go over perennials next. All right. Stratification. Do you know what stratification is? Anybody hear that term? Yes, yes. Anybody here really into growing native plants? Okay. Most of your native plants need to be stratified because they have grown in this climate in Maryland or wherever you are, wherever you live. Those native plants have grown in that climate, and they're used to the cold. They need the cold to develop. So you can force stratification, stick them in the freezer for a couple months, so you can like force them to grow. So if it's the middle of the summer, Baptisia is one. I don't think that's one even up there. Lavender, hyssop, catnip, perennial sunflowers. You can stick them in the freezer in the middle of the summer and fool them that they've been through a winter. Okay, so it's kind of like, that's how people force seeds. That they have to be frozen, they have to be in the cold before they will germinate. So here's a list. This is not all-inclusive, there's many more, but just gives you an idea. Why does it make sense that native plants would need to be stratified? That's the climate, right, exactly. Okay. All right. So that's, any questions about annuals? What's the difference between a vegetable plant and a flowering plant? What's the difference? Nothing really. I'm sorry. What were you going to say? That's okay. What were you going to say?
Well, I thought it was more like the difference.
Okay. Okay. Well, and you make a good point, though. I'm glad you brought that up because a fruit has the seeds on the inside, right? Vegetable is, a true vegetable is the leafy part. It's the actual, what's the word? I'm using my words today. It's the vegetative part, vegetative part of the plant. So a true vegetable would be collard, broccoli, cauliflower, right? Because it's the true vegetative part of the plant. Tomato, what is it? Fruit. Okay, so people say eat your vegetables, eat your tomatoes. Don't get obnoxious and tell them they're wrong, but anyway. So but that was a good question. But actually, flowers and vegetables are really not any different. So if you're going to, a vegetable or a fruit is actually a further part of the life cycle of a flower and an edible plant. Okay, so perennial plants. That's what we'll probably focus most on today, because those propagation methods are the ones that people spend a lot of time learning, okay? And those are the plants that you spend more money for at the nursery too, right? So that's when if you want to know how to propagate. They're usually easier to maintain. If they're natives, they attract jewel pollinators. They are good for the birds. So anybody have a nandina in their front yard? That's a good thing. It's in a container. They're beautiful plants, but they're from China, and the birds can't eat the berries. They're gorgeous at Christmas time because these red, but they're perennials, but they're not native perennial. But so when you have a perennial like that that's not native, you might want to find one that can replace it so it can feed your wildlife. This is a long list, okay? Perennial plants last 2 or more seasons. They don't have to last forever. I mean, an oak tree can last 600 years, right? It's a perennial plant, right? A lavender plant only lasts about 4 or 5 years. It's a perennial plant. So each plant has its own life cycle. What type of plant don't I really talk about here? Anybody? What's parsley, you know? Biennial. A biennial has, its life cycle is just 2 years. Biennial. It's a whole different category, not going to worry about it, okay? But it flowers in the second year and creates its seeds in the second year, and then it dies. Okay. So here's some things to really consider about perennials. I don't know if you're into landscaping your house or putting things in pots or whatever, but once you get a perennial, it's there. I mean, like a fig tree. Once you put a fig tree in your front yard and it gets big, you're not moving it, right? So you want to make sure it's in the right place, it gets the right light, and you're going to love it for its life cycle. Otherwise, once it gets big and you love the tree, but all of a sudden it shades all of your annual flowers out, you're gonna, okay. So be careful about perennials. You gotta put them in the right place. And like I said, if you're landscaping, perennials are about 80% of your landscape. Those are your evergreens, your hollies, things like that that kind of fill in the space. Okay. And also think about climate, okay? Anybody try to grow rosemary here? Right. Rosemary is tough to grow here if you leave it outside because it can freeze out. It's actually from, where do you think rosemary comes from originally? The Mediterranean climate, so it needs a Mediterranean climate. Okay, a lot of your herbs are like that. Here's your categories. You have herbaceous, you do have herbaceous, a peony, right? Hosta, right? So they're herbaceous. They die back to the ground and then they come back the next year, but they're still there. They last for many, many years. Woody plants, they have they have branching, but they might lose their leaves. They might maintain their leaves, but they're woody. Evergreen, you know what evergreens are. There's different types of plants you want to plant at different times of the year. Some plants need to be planted in the winter when they're not actively growing. Some plants need to be planted in the spring when they are actively growing. I have a book here. It's called Propagating Plants. I recommend it. It's got fine, but it's written by Alan Toogood. It was actually originally written for the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK. It's got like 50 million plants. Every single plant that you could ever think of is in here. You can get it on Amazon. So if you have doubts, when should I plant it? Go to the internet, Google it, go to YouTube. You can go down that rabbit hole and never come out, all right? Okay. Peggy brought some seed starting books, all right? And this kind of gives you the same, how do you get early harvests, how do you get the first tomato on the block, okay? So books are always great. Keep them on your bedside table. And as we said, Maryland, most locations fall between 5 and 10, so be careful. All right. Any questions so far? All right. A lot of you are vegetable gardeners. And we talked about a lot of our vegetables are annuals, right? But this is a list of actual perennial vegetables, edibles, perennial. So if you don't want to plant every year, plant these, and your job is done, okay? And a lot of these can be done in pots. Like Jerusalem artichokes, you can grow them in pots. Chives, pots. All of the herbs, all of the like lettuce type stuff, radicchio, dandelions can be in a pot. Anybody make dandelion wine? Dandelion wine. I'm sorry?
Oh, I said, okay, please.
I know. Sorrel what sorrel is? It's a, yeah, it's a leaf, and some of it's very pretty. It's almost decorative. It has that red stripes through it. Glowbark horseradish can be grown in a pot. All right. Horseradish takes maybe once you plant it, takes about 2 or 3 years before you have a really good root that you can start chipping away. When you eat horseradish, you're eating the root, not the leaf. Okay. Which is good because most of it will be gone when the harping beetles get to it anyway. Onions. Has anybody ever seen an Egyptian walking onion? Do we have them out in the garden? Does anybody?
I don't know if they're still out there or
If they got replanted. What happens? I wish I had a picture because these are very cool. It's an onion with a small bulb, and it has almost like a chive spring onion stalk. The scapes are at the top, and you can eat them too, put them in the frying pan. But the scapes are heavy, and they fall down, and then they plant in the ground and set up a hole. And you can put them in your garden. You can put them on one corner, and a couple years later, you have them on the other side of your garden. They're very cool. That's why they call them walking onions. Yes? That's fine. If you leave them in the ground, they will last forever. As we take them out to eat them, so they're only going to be an annual because you force them to live a year. If you leave them in the ground, like the Egyptian walking onion, you can take part of it and it'll just keep on going and going and going. Has anybody, speaking of garlic, has anybody left a garlic clove in the ground by mistake and not pulled everything? And you bring it up the next year, it's got multiple, it's almost like self-seeding, but it lasts. It lasts over time. Its life cycle is more than 1 year. Yeah. So, I actually brought you a present. Couple presents. Oh, okay. Well, there's the glad. So here, this is, we're going to talk about this in a minute. So, but, all right, so that's why. So you're right, absolutely. You think it's an annual, but it's really not because you've pulled it up. I mean, some of these things too. Does anybody know what good King Henry is? It's a green. It's a green. Sweet potato. Okay. Has anybody ever seen that word before and say, I can't pronounce it? Impress people. Okay. So you'll see that. So everybody with me. Okay, that's a sweet potato. Okay. We have sweet potato vines here. I don't know if they have. They die out here if you leave them outside. Actually, if you have a protected environment, my backyard. I live on Calvert Street in Charles Village, right? Right down in the middle of Charles Village, and I have a backyard, just all stockade fence in, right? And these actually will come up again the next year if I put them in a pot and forget to pull them out. Yeah. If they're dug deep enough and in a place where they get sun. So, correct legginess. Can you tell they've been out in the field for a while? I wonder what kind of bug loves them. It's not a special lacy plant.
Do you know saying the full name?
Ipomia batatas. Like Kumo.
Yeah.
Iron blanking. Ipomia batatas. Yeah. So, this is just an aside. When I started when I first became a master gardener, I knew all the colloquial names for things. It was a peony, it was a sunflower. It really does make sense to try to be familiar with some of the Latin names. If you move to California, it'll have the same plant, but it'll have a different colloquial name, but it'll have the same Latin name. It's a whole nother course, but go home and in the privacy of your own room, start pronouncing it. Once you start saying it out loud, it becomes more comfortable to say these things, okay? Watercress. Everybody knows what a nasturtium is, right? Did you know watercress is a nasturtium, part of the nasturtium family? I think that's kind of cool, but you wouldn't know that by the colloquial name. But you look at the Latin name and you can see what it's related to.
The Missouri Botanical Garden, which is a great website, always has a pronunciation, so you can click on it. and
Yeah.
hear it.
So it's really some of the colloquial names incorporate the Latin name, but like onions, Egyptian walking onions. That's not Latin. I can tell you that right now. Does anybody know how broccoli got its name? Anybody see James Bond movies? You know who the producer of the James and director of the early James Bond was? Broccoli. His family developed broccoli in Italy. You'll see, that's why when you see broccoli, it's normally capitalized, because broccoli is a name of a person who developed the plant. Usually that'll happen. If somebody actually developed the plant, it'll have their name and it'll be capitalized. You can propagate perennials from seed. The problem with propagating from seed is that it takes too long. Usually it takes 3 years for a perennial to actually come to its full size from seed. Okay, there's advantages. Their diseases are less likely to be carried over, because when you buy a plant in the nursery or get it from a friend, you don't know what's in the soil, you don't know what is coming along with the plant. Seed is clean, right? Quite often you can get a fancy plant from seed that you can't get in the store. Like I said, somebody grows a beautiful perennial, it's going to cost you $50 to $100, $50 to $100. Peonies are one of those things. You get a specialized peony or tree peony, some places charge you up to $200 to $300 for these things. You can start them from seed. You got to make sure that you're going to live at least 3 to 5 years so you can see. I'm going to have the patience. Most of the time, if you have one in your yard, you end up cutting it down or mowing it down or something. The disadvantages, seeds of species plants will come true to type, where cultivars may not come true. It takes longer time for plant to flower and fruit, and actually you have to be careful. Yes. Planting perennial seed, you have to be really careful when you plant it, so that it agrees with what their history comes from. When do you plant them? Do they need to be stratified? That kind of thing. Okay, so this is a little confusing. Okay, seeds, you'll grow, they'll come out what the seed is supposed to be. A cultivar is normally a hybrid, which has been cross-pollinated. They do it in perennials too, cultivars. Flowers more likely than vegetables. Peonies, roses, what are some other cultivars? You have like your cone flowers. Have you seen multiple cone flowers, right? But those are cultivars, right? That means that they're the same thing, like a coneflower is still a coneflower, but maybe now it's a Cherokee coneflower, or maybe it's a white swan coneflower. It's been kind of like taken far away from its original plant that it was, that nice purple, is it Echinacea purpura in the Midwest. So they're all the same family, but if you do seed, you'll most likely go back to your original. Okay, so let's start talking about cuttings. We're going to actually have oh my God, I talked too much. So we're going to have a little experiment activity. There's a lot of plants you're going to cut, you're going to stick it in the soil. You're actually going to get a pot and put the soil in your own pot, because I don't have it all prepped for you. So I have some trowels for you. You can use another pot as a trowel. We're going to make sure that the soil is moist. I have rooting hormone you can stick it in. People brought some plants in to share, which is wonderful. The thing about cuttings is the same as a transplant. You need to harden them off. Once you need to keep them protected. A lot of cuttings you put a little bag over, so it keeps it like a mini greenhouse until it gets its roots. So here's just a way Usually from new growth, okay? Perennials from cuttings, usually from new growth. Yes.
Can you describe more what you mean when you say gardening off?
Okay. When a plant is grown in a protected environment, it hasn't been exposed to direct sun, it hasn't been exposed to wind, it hasn't been exposed to extreme temperatures. It's pretty much a constant environment. When you harden off a plant, I don't care what kind of plant it is that you've grown inside or in a greenhouse, it needs to be hardened off so that when you put it in the ground, it can stand up to the elements, all right? You just don't put it outside. It's kind of a pain, I have to admit. You take the plant, you stick it outside for a few hours, bring it back in, depending on the plant, all right? Stick it out for a few more hours. Usually takes 3 to 5 days to harden a plant off successfully. Some people will have maybe a cold frame they'll stick them in. If you really are into it, you'll build something so you can put them outside, then you lift the cold frame up, you put the lid down. They're kind of fun to build because then you can extend your growing season in the cold frame too, but that's hardening off. Does that explain anything? Right. Because if you put it out too soon, it's going to shrivel, it's going to be bent over. You have to have, like trees, when they plant trees, have you seen they put the supports on it? I'll show you something. He's got a little bit. Got kind of beat a little bit. That's a bald cypress. Believe it or not. I got these as sticks, right? This one got a little beaten in the car in the wind, so I don't know if it's going to make it. We'll see. Anyway, if anybody wants one of these, you just stick it in the ground, water it, and it'll grow in a beautiful tree. Has anybody been to the Lowe's out on, what's the one out? It's not Lock Ray, is it Joppa Road? What's the one? That Lowe's that's out there, right past Lock Raven Boulevard. If you look in their parking lot, those are all bald cypress. So you think they grow in swamps? They'll grow in a parking lot. They'll grow anywhere. They're really easy to grow. But anyway, these had to be hardened off. They were grown in a greenhouse with twigs. State of Delaware. I got them because the state of Delaware bought something like 5,000 of them and they had like 500 left in the year. But they grew them in a greenhouse and they had to be hardened off outside before you can put them in the ground. Okay? So that's hardening off.
You had mentioned a bag over something, so then I was confused because I thought hardening off meant like when you say.
I see,
Put a
yeah.
bag over it, I was.
When you're putting a bag over it, you're creating kind of a little greenhouse for it and creating more. You don't want it to be so wet that it condenses on the bag or whatever, but it helps keeps the moisture from wicking away, and then it just keeps that warmth. It keeps the warmth in it. We're not talking about commercial propagation here. I mean, commercial greenhouses use the same methods, but they have so many other ways to create that greenhouse effect or do the stem cuttings, that kind of thing. Okay. Most people think dahlias grow from tubers, right? Did you know you can eat dahlia tubers? Yes, dahlia tubers are actually edible. I've never eaten one. You probably have to use a lot of sugar to make it taste good. But if you ever get stuck anywhere and you're hungry and you don't have anything else to eat and there's a dahlia, dig it up and eat the tuber. All right, so the things I want you to notice, because this all stem cuttings, you need to have a nodule. You need to have something that the roots are going to grow out of, okay? And that's right there. You need to put it in moist soil, right? And here's the bag. I just wanted you to see a picture of the bag, okay? When you see dahlias at the farmer's market or see them in the grocery store, you probably won't because they're very hard. If you're a flower grower, dahlias are like what is it? They're like the Excelsior of flower growing because they're very delicate. But they're all from the stem cuttings. They're not from tubers because you have to dig the tubers up every fall because they don't last the winter here, and then replant them. If you do the cuttings and keep them going, it's much easier. So I just have some. I love dahlias. So I have There's some dahlias. Those are cactus dahlias. Aren't they gorgeous? Those are grown from stem cuttings. So you can do that. Okay, so if you have one tuber, all right, and you have multiple stems, you can actually, this is where it gets a little tricky, and I shouldn't tell you this, all right? There's a dahlia called Cafe au Lait. The florists sell it for weddings. It's very popular in June. It's called Cafe au Lait because it's this beautiful white with kind of like a dusty brown center, and you sometimes pay almost $10 to $15 a blossom for your wedding bouquet. All right, so you can get one tuber, and it'll come up, and then you have like 5 or 6 stems coming up. Next year, you'll have 5 or 6 cafe au lait. All right? So they're absolutely gorgeous. They're like this big, and I suggest when you leave here, if you have time, there is a dahlia garden up near the carriage house. So it's something to see. Beautiful.
You use plastic bag for the stem cuttings throughout the entire picture when you're growing them?
No, only until they create a root. Once they root, and you can always tell when something's rooted because you kind of pull on it and it doesn't come up easily, means that it started to put out things and it's holding itself into the soil. So you can always tell when you transplant something or have a stem cutting, when you try to pull it out and it doesn't come out easily, that's when you can move the bag. Still keep it moist, and that's also when you can start to fertilize. Like anything else, the stem cuttings, you don't want to put in any kind of mix that has like Miracle Grow says it'll feed your plants for the next 6 months and keep the moisture. You don't want to use Miracle Grow. You want to just use a plain, sterile planting medium. Okay. Ace Hardware sells Pro Mix. Okay, if you do a lot of transplanting, just get a big bale of it. Pro Mix. Pro Mix. There used to be a place downtown called Myers Seed. Has anybody ever been there? They closed. It was like our last vestige of like good farm seed. Yeah, I think. Okay, shipping. I'm hoping this works. It's only got like a 3-minute video. Shipping. Let's see. Do I have to sound? I should have sound. Let me see. It might have to be out of. It's out of mine. Let's see if I can get loud. Oh. Anyway, so this is chipping. I love this guy. He's called the Amaryllis Man. This is an amaryllis bulb. Okay, I'll just talk through it for you. He's got this great. He sounds like West Virginia. He's been doing this for decades. So what you do when you chip daffodils, narcissus bulbs, amaryllis bulbs. That's how they propagate them, is by chipping. They don't wait them to have the side bulbs come off because it takes too long for that to happen. So they'll cut the bulb in sections. If you notice, they put like a little stick to keep the bulb from approximating, so keep it apart. You put it in the soil, and that's what you get. Because the trick to chipping is the plate. You want to make sure that you keep the plate of the bulb intact, at least on one of the chips. I think I have a picture, but this is, I wish I had the sound, but I'm gonna have to figure out if I do this again. As you can see, look at the roots coming out of there. So now I'm just gonna break it up.
Am I plating the top of
The plate is like where the roots come out. Here, these are glad bulbs that you don't really usually chip, and take the paper off. Usually when you do bulbs, you actually will take the paper off the bulbs. It's actually better for the bulb. But look, so look at this. So he cut it in 4s. But look, he's actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different amaryllis. Christmas time, ladies and gentlemen. People love amaryllis for presents, so you can actually make a lot of these and give them away. Yes, ma'am.
How long do you think from shipping it and planting it to getting?
The amaryllis? It probably takes a year, or I mean, it'll grow. This is like in 6 weeks, I think, to get those leaves. But this is the other thing, is that it's one of those things when you propagate perennials, it takes time for them to flower. Okay, but it's worth it. Think about Christmas a couple years ago. Anyway, but look at that. But that's awesome. Just you can do it with daffodils. So like narcissus bulbs, things like that. You can do that. All right. So that's chipping. Oh look, he's so cute. You ought to hear him. Look, it's the amaryllis man. Look, that's what he looks like. Oh, he's so sweet. I want to meet him. Okay, chipping and amaryllis hippestrum. Hippestrum, believe it or not. Hippeas strum. Oh. So if you want to find that, and he has a whole channel that he does about amaryllis. You can actually order from him.
That's what I was gonna ask, can you get these at like Lowe's?
The amaryllis.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Amaryllis, come Christmas time, they sell them everywhere because people love
So
to
at
give them.
Christmas time?
Yeah, you'll see them and they come, usually they're not cheap. They come in a box and they look really pretty and you'll see the bulb and it'll have like a green thing coming out of the top.
Giant sells them for like $7-8.
Okay.
Now starting Halloween.
Okay,
And
right.
mine, so that's where I get mine. Really hard every year, not that it's expensive to buy one. But they flower, they don't only flower Christmas time. Like,
You can force them. Yeah.
I don't know how to force them. I just put them in the skylight and then every now and then I say the balloons knock them down and put it on the table for balloons.
Right.
Put it back in the sky.
Yeah.
No, so I can do that myself?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay.
Yeah.
Cut it in half and do the stick.
Right. Look it up. There's a couple different. I know being a master gardener, we are required and we vow to stay within the scientific gardening guidelines set out by the University of Maryland Extension. There's so much anecdotal information now, and years ago, before the internet, master gardeners really did a lot of education. There's so much online now that you can see. My only warning is this. Look at it. It's fun. Like I said, it's a rabbit hole. You can go down. There's one, she's great. She's a flower grower. It's called Don't Eat the Flowers, I think it's called, something like that. And there's another one that's up in Maine. And they're really wonderful presenters, but be careful. Don't just assume that everything that they're saying is good practice, okay? You want to make sure that what they're telling you actually is scientifically based. University of Maryland has their, if I have time, their resources are amazing. In fact, a lot of the other master gardeners and extension offices use University of Maryland as a basis for their programs and their research. The University of Maryland has a great research program. University of North Carolina is good. And then the other one, actually Texas is pretty good on their line. So if you want to go Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let me
And
see.
Pennsylvania is nice because they're very similar zones to us.
Okay.
If you grow Pennsylvania, you probably grow, compared to like Florida extension, you're gonna have a lot of different.
So I'm going to ask Peggy to kind of like show you. These, talk about garlic. Garlic's a big one for us, right? Everybody loves garlic. When do you plant garlic? Fall, right? And so when does it usually come up? In June, you know. Okay, so planting garlic, we're not going to go into how to take care of it. What we're doing is propagating garlic. Okay, we know that most, and I brought you guys some presents here. I only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many of you are there? One. Who's going to grow garlic this year? All right. Okay. This is good Eastern Shore garlic, and it's got cloves. I mean, has everybody grown garlic in here? They understand how it grows. So when you grow garlic, I'm going to have. It's going to take forever. These are spectacular garlic bulbs. They're culinary, but they're organic and they will grow a garlic plant. Okay. So here's your peel and just let everybody have it. Okay, so I bought these, I brought them over so you can have some nice big. Your garlics from this, ideally, if you have the right soil, the right compost, and you put this garlic clove in the ground and take care of it like a good plant daddy. You should have the same size garlic, okay?
Valerie, do you allium flowers?
You know what?
Allium flowers?
Okay, probably done. Interesting. So what Peggy is passing around, you know what escape is? Like when the garlic or the onion like puts a stalk up and it has like this little thing. That's actually a seed pod. But those are actually like little cloves in there.
Trying to see. I can break
So
them up.
I brought you some examples, but you can see here, okay?
I know.
But like any perennial that you start from seed, garlic's the same way. You're going to get a garlic. Let me see. Where is it? Here's year 1. Here's year 2. Here's year 3. And here's your year 4. That's the one I'm passing around.
Now that's what planting the scape.
That's planting the scape, the seed from the scape. Okay? The scape is, yes, that comes from the scape. And then, there's no, I think they're all opened up. I actually
Yes.
cut these down while they were still closed, and they
Right.
actually opened up after they dried.
Really?
Yep.
Because scapes are good to eat now.
Scapes you can eat.
But see, look how you break it up.
Yeah, you break it up. Each one of those will be a new garlic plant.
And then you can't spread that out.
Yeah.
Each one of those will create a new garlic.
So the fast way to grow garlic is to go ahead and use a full clove.
Yeah.
Plant it, we talked about, you plant it in the mold, and by that I mean you
We
plant
can
them
like
all,
that in your spaghetti.
so cloves. You plant them all individually,
Right.
how far apart are you? So 4 inches, 4 to 6 inches, and then in theory, this will give you a new bulb. This is what I recommend doing.
If you-
Farmers markets are good, you have to be careful about grocery store garlic, you can still do it, I've done it, it works. The issue is a lot of grocery store products, they spray things to make sure.
Growth
the
inhibitors.
root inhibitors, which is kind of the opposite of what you're looking for. So using garlics or onions in the grocery store, that could be an issue. So that's why just go to a farmer's market or something and ask if they've sprayed them, and if not, then you can use those as your base. But ideally, this will then give you 12 new garlics, and I tend to just, if they do well, kind of save, and it's kind of weird because you want to eat it, but my practice is saving my best bulb to use as my seeds for next year.
They will start to have their own flavor depending on your soil. So you can have your own, you can have your own Ashley garlic, your own Valerie
So
garlic.
now I value class, so I get to eat that.
When you squeeze one of these little things, it really smells like strong garlic.
Yep, doesn't it? Yep. Okay, so we gotta hurry on here.
Yep.
I'm taking too long. From seed, asparagus is another one you can grow from seed. Another one that you have to wait though, 3 to 4 years before you're really going to get the plants. So, and also asparagus you can cut up. If you notice, you can get your own asparagus seed. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, if you have asparagus frugare, which is a houseplant asparagus, if you have one that's old enough, it puts out these little red berries. The seeds are inside them. You can actually crush them and replant them. It's kind of fun. Like I said, if you don't have any kids, what else? All right, so here's chipping bulbs. Oh darn, there he is again. I missed him. So here's more chipping. This gives you an idea of, here's the sequence of growth of the chipping. Okay? All right, we went over that. We went over that. Okay, leaf cutting. Who figured it? Probably not. Probably 700. All right, leaf cutting is usually done with succulents. Who likes succulents here? Okay. House plants. Okay, these are stem plants. So we got this. I'm going to show you. You can come up and take a look. This is I'm kind of like a sloppy gardener. I got succulent from Lowe's, and it started to put off little things. This is a plug tray. Filled it with soil, just stuck the leaves in here. Look what I got. It's kind of cool. It's even put out, these are done, but it blooms. I've got a jade plant in here. I've got a pearl, one of those little Persian pearls. I've got all kinds of little things in here. But I use a plug tray. And then you can get different size plug trays depending on what you want. Obviously, the smaller the tray, the quicker they need to get put into a pot or a soil. Okay, you can actually put seeds in here and start seeding on these plug trays. This is from a friend of mine who's a flower gardener. That's the other thing. If you're a flower gardener and you want successive sometimes you just order the plugs rather than start the seeds yourself. I call it cheating if you like propagation, but if you're a commercial grower, this is what you do.
Much less expensive too.
Oh yeah, growing from seed is always cheaper. What do I have? Leaf cutting. Does anybody, you know what a snake plant is? Okay, that's actually called a sensivaria. This is a snake plant. You can cut your snake plant in slices and stick it in the soil. Do that. This is what most people do. This is the leaf petiole. This is like for this is the succulents. All right, and here's just a list of things that you can grow from leaf cutting. Rex begonia. Does anyone know what a Rex begonia is? House plant. Actually, a Rex begonia in the warmer climates can be a perennial. Okay, if you keep it outside, it'll die, but you can bring it in. Leaf bud cuttings. You always need to have something that has rooting hormones that make a growth hormone in it. And so that's what you're really looking for. That part of the plant that maintains the growth hormone. Some plants need a little bit of help. Rooting hormone, you can tell me, look at this. We'll probably, if you wanted to put some stuff in soil, I have this for you to dip your stuff in. What the rooting hormone does, it doesn't really make the plant root faster, but it keeps it from getting bacteria and disease. So it gives it a better environment for growing, okay? I actually read somewhere this guy, it was on YouTube, I have to say, and I read it also another place. Rooting hormone really helps the roots grow, and it takes longer for the top growth, but that actually isn't a bad thing. I'd want to have a nice solid root system for a plant before it started growing leaves. Okay. So rooting hormone is always helpful when you transplant, keeps from disease. Okay. Let's see, root cuttings. Now, blackberries. Does anybody grow blackberries, raspberries? Your mother did, yeah. And actually, you'll see a lot around town. They just start to grow wild. What they do basically, you have the runners. What they're doing is basically cutting the runners and planting them. So you can either plant them horizontally or straight up and down. The runner itself, I call them runners. The runner itself has the growth hormones in it. It has the growth ability, and the roots. It's a root. But wherever you cut it, it's going to stimulate growth.
Is it the same thing with grapes?
Yes. Grapes. You can do, that's how they brought them from Europe, from Italy. All those grapes in the vineyards, those are all from roots. Yeah. They just kept them moist, so they wouldn't die, make sure that they didn't get disease. Mildew is basically fungus, is usually a big one.
Is it illegal to go from different countries and propagate like right back and bring it back here? Like if you do that food?
Nope. You real? Every country has rules on what you can bring in and out of the country. If you try to bring things in and through customs, you can get things really bad if you try to bring things in.
And one reason why is a lot of it is bugs. You don't know if there are any bugs in that plant, things like that. And that's how we got lantern flies. You know, they got on a ship, they got in something transport. That was probably not even someone illegally bringing it, but that is one of the big reasons, like invasives, what might grow really well in Europe, in America, is considered an invasive plant, and that just brought something that's going to potentially fragment the ecosystem. So that's why you're not allowed to bring it.
That's a whole, I recommend if you really want to understand invasives to study it because it has a lot to do with trade, our history of trade with China. You notice they don't have very many invasives from us. We get, because they bring most of their stuff here. We don't send, we send money there, they send goods here. All right, so next, dividing. So this is basically a lot what we're going to do. We're going to do cutting, we're going to do dividing, stem cutting. I asked last week, I said bring knives or whatever. I don't know if you did. We'll try to make do with what we've got. I've got pots, I've got soil. So when you do dividing is really good for perennials. Perennials only last for about 3 years healthily. By that time, you ever see a plant looks like a donut and there's nothing that grows out in the middle? It's time to divide. It means it's root bound, the mother plant has had it, it's lived its life, but it's created other plants around it. So you're gonna dig it up, you're gonna pull it apart, get rid of the mother plant, make sure you use clean tools, and you can then spread it around the yard, put it in a pot, give it to your grandmother, or give it to your granddaughter, whatever, okay. So the other thing about dividing though, you don't, say if you divide a hosta, okay, I have some property in Delaware, these plants have been sitting out in the field for a while, hard to tell. But you can see these leaves are kind of funky. So this is called, this is gold standard, that's the name of this hosta. It's pretty, it's got a gold center and the green leaf, and each one of these pots has 1, 2, 3, about 4 or 5 different singular plants, so you're welcome to them, okay? But you want to cut the leaves off. It's going to grow, but the leaves are going to require more water and more sun, or they're going to require more energy, and it's going to take it away from the roots. So when you divide it, you want to take away the top part as much as possible. Leave a little, but take away a lot of it, and that way it gives the roots better energy, okay? Because they want to establish. This is Artemisia, kind of scraggly looking things. You can do a stem cutting from this. If you notice, smell it. When you come in, smell it.
Deer resistant.
Deer resistant. Anything that's smelly is deer resistant. If you don't want deer, get smelly plants. That's the bottom line. Smelly plants are ones. You think thorns keep deer away? They love roses. New shoots of roses, they will just clean you out. But Artemisia will stay in your garden. It has a lot of little buds that are coming out from the stem. So basically, you can cut this off. As you know, there's growth coming out of the stem. And then put it in the soil. Keep it moist. That's important. And you'll have plants. You could probably make like 3 or 4 plants out of that. Notice how leggy they are. You know, they get hot. There's a lot of dead stuff. If you want to try to make it look better, you can. The house plant, geraniums are good for this. Anybody have geraniums in their house and just get long and leggy? You can do this with geraniums and then keep them from being leggy by cutting them off and repotting them. Okay? So that's Artemisia. I'm not a super house plant person. Oh, the pathos, okay.
Yes, it's more than pathos, so it'll be a long binding thing.
Yeah.
But I had, a month ago, I cut those off, the bottoms or whatnot, and stuck.
She was so good, she prepared for the class.
I just stuck them in water and waited to see some roots. These could have gone in there a week or two ago. They've got nice roots, because you want to take a stem home or whatnot.
If you root in a pot or a water like this, you can't just stick it in soil and expect it to be healthy. They're so used to the water that they need, it's another way of hardening them off, to be honest. When you put them in soil, you need to keep that soil a little more moist or wet, maybe for a week or 2 until they really get their soil roots, because these are water roots. The soil roots are different, they pull up different nutrients. Same thing though, you don't really want to start feeding it until they get, because it's going to be too much, it might shock. If you put too much nitrogen in the plant, it's too hot, it'll kill it, so you want to be careful. So that's hardening off from water, okay. So that's dividing. Asparagus, I'm trying to think of vegetables you divide. Asparagus you would divide, horseradish, rhubarb you would divide. Rhubarb comes back every year at the same time your strawberries come back, so that's rhubarb strawberry pie. I think that's it. Daylilies. Daylilies. There's a reason they're called daylilies. They only last a day. You can't, they're not really good cut flowers, so just let them stay in the ground. Okay. But daylilies, they'll get these huge clumps. Okay. This is division. This is just, sometimes you want to pick the right season to divide. Look online, look in a book. plant that you want. There's so many different variables, we can't go over them. I just want you to be aware that they're variables. But the main thing is you want to keep them moist, all right? And you want to make sure you don't divide too much. You want to keep good root stock with it. And I think that's about it. A lot of plants you want to divide when they're dormant, to make sure that you have the right plant. Okay, I love this way of doing stuff. You can do this with hydrangeas, okay? Basically what you're doing is you're taking a plant, and you can do this with that Artemisia over there. Huh? Sweet potato and the Artemisia, I think I can do that too. Yeah, and sweet potato, you can sweet potato. Always carry a pin, have pins. I can give you a list of stuff you need to keep in your trunk. If you want a true gardener, you always have this. So, all right, sweet potato vines. Basically what you're doing is you're just putting this in the soil, you're pinning it down, covering up the pin with the soil. You don't even have to do that for a lot of stuff. You're just going to grow roots, and you're going to have another sweet potato vine. It's called layering. Hydrangeas do great with this. Hydrangeas do great with layering. If you have, stems, soft stems that are close to the ground, stick it down there, put them in the ground, and they grow really fast. You'll have another hydrangea bush in each year. So the Artemisia, you can do the same thing. This is another one where you can see where it has the buds coming off the stem. You can kind of push it down in the ground. Pins, recommend them highly. Does everybody have their garden tool bag? You have a tool bag?
Yes.
Good. All right, this is my little garden tool bag, my growing needed tool bag. And then I always have clippers, I have a weeder, I have pins, I have rooting hormone, and gloves, all right? And a trowel is always nice. If you're going down the road, especially when you go over the Bay Bridge, and you see black-eyed Susans and cattails and things, I always like to have a nice strong. These are rose gloves. So if you're going to prune, they go up your arm so you don't get stuck. The other thing I always like to carry, and I don't know about anybody else, I always have a tape measure with me. Wherever I go, there are things that need to be measured. And clippers. You don't need expensive clippers. People try to say, oh, but these are from Ace. That's great stuff. Ace is the place. All right, and if we're going to propagate rooting hormone, keep that at home. Keep a tray, keep a plug tray and pots. I hoard pots. In fact, a lot of your growers don't want to even give their pots away because of the supply lines. They were waiting like 6 months for 4-inch pots and 6-inch pots. So to buy them, they've gotten very expensive. So if you get to the store, like I got this at Babaco back in the spring. I'll save this pot because it's going to have, and when you save things for propagation, and I didn't do it today, so I'm not always true to my word, you really need to clean them before you reuse them because you don't know what kind of bacteria, or any fungus. Something that might be in here that doesn't affect the Artemisia might affect whatever you put in the plant that follows this one. So you want to be careful. Alcohol's good.
What about clay pots? You make clay pots.
You still should clean them. Yeah. A solution like 1 to 10 of bleach is good for clay pots because it to soak in to the side so that you can kill any kind of bacteria. Yeah. Let them dry. You don't want to plant in bleach, obviously. Clean your tools off with alcohol. The world is full of alcohol right now because of COVID. You don't want your plants to get COVID.
I said purple alcohol, not routine water.
Aw. Oh, I mean, I don't know what's stronger. I mean, I think that, I don't know, whatever's stronger. Okay, so climbing roses. Did anybody here grow roses? Okay, I know I'm going over. Air layering. Okay, I brought some sphagnum moss. You can take some home with you and try this. It's really cool. You can do it on vines. You kind of throw this, wet it, put it around the stem, put plastic around it, tie it on there, and if you keep it moist, you'll see roots starting to grow into the bag, and you stick it in the ground, all right? I'm gonna rush through these, because I really want you to have time to do some stuff with them. Okay, don't worry about this semi-hardwood propagation, it's in here for you enough, hardwood, but I have some elderberry twigs here, and I have some fig, okay? They've been in water, so they should be viable, but you're gonna have to cut them back. Take them home, look it up. But I brought them for you just to practice and play with, okay? Got elderberry, I got that. I've got the 3 viable bald-leaf cypress that's there. Heuchera, there's a heuchera here. Everybody know what a heuchera is? Beautiful plant. They call it coral bells. I always want to say fairy bells.
Yes.
I know. This little flower comes up, and they have different sizes. This is a kind of a burgundy one. We do have a native heuchera that's just a green. It's a beautiful green, and it'll self-seed everywhere. They like shade, but I thought this one was good because there's a lot of, you can divide, okay? And heuchera eventually will start putting plants out here, like the spider plant. See that spider plant? It'll start throwing shoots out with roots, shoots with roots, okay? And all of those can go in a moist soil. Spider plants will take over the world.
Yep, so you just cut them off and then you get some roots, put them in dirt.
You can actually root them in water first too. Yeah, you root them in water.
They can live in water.
Yeah, they can live in water. I think my mother has one from her wedding day or something, and she's 93. She has a geranium that she has had since 1992. The reason we know, because it was, it was in a gift to her when my dad died. She's had that geranium since 1992. Yeah. Okay, heuchera. I'm getting all that. All right, this is grafting. This is actually the last thing, okay? Believe it or not. Grafting is very intensive type of propagation. You can go to a grafting workshop, you'll have them every once in a while. The trick to grafting is that you have to have a plant where the rootstock and the scion, which is the thing you want to grow, match, so that the nutrients will go up and down. Usually you graft plants that are similar, fruit trees, citrus trees, things that are, but you can graft tomatoes too, believe it or not. Nightshade family, you graft peppers and tomatoes in the same thing. So if you notice here, red apples, yellow apples, same tree. Citrus, I'm sorry, these are plums. Yellow plums, red plums, on the same tree. Okay? Kind of cool, huh? All right, let me see what else.
Is the nutrition still the same, or is it different than if it would be regular when you graft it? Is it something being taken from when you do it? Is it a lesser or something?
Not really. Usually the rootstock is a very strong growing, hardy plant, okay? It will take over sometimes, and that's when you have a graft failure, when the rootstock decides it's going to be the plant. A successful graft, the rootstock behaves itself, and the graft itself will take over. A lot of roses are grafted, and you'll notice a beautiful tea rose, and then you'll have like another kind of a multifloral with the rootstock here at the bottom, and you have to cut that back. But it doesn't take away from the plant, and it helps maintain a cultivar. There's a lot of good reasons to graft. It's very difficult for the home gardener. You really have to practice. Even with successful, or people who do it for a living, they only have maybe a 70% success rate for grafting. Okay. All right, I have examples of grafting. There's the peppers and the tomatoes on the same plant. Okay, bud grafting, wedge grafting, tongue grafting, but the overriding theory is the same. You have to get the xylem and the phloem matching, so that it gets its nutrients and it has good water flow, okay? You went over xylem and phloem, right?
I don't know who did, but that's basically just the vascular system.
The vascular system of the plant. So you know that plants grow on the outside, not on the inside, right?
Say that again?
Plants grow on the outside, basically, not on the inside. You know, when you see a hollow tree, you think it's dead, but it looks really healthy. It's because of all the nutrients. So this is your house. Thanks for listening.